In this episode, From Chains to Change, I want to talk to you about the 4 trauma responses and the stages of change. The late, great Queen of Soul sung passionately about her emotional bondage. Y'all remember her song, Chain, Chain, Chain. Chain of fools, right? That was Aretha. She discovered that she was not in an exclusive relationship. He was stressing her out. He wasn't treating her right. And he challenged her to leave him, right? But she sung about bondage to this man's love. Well, how many of us are in bondage to our old trauma traps? And how often will we let them make fools of us? How long will you let your trauma traps hold you hostage? Until you're emotionally starved and desperate? Until your hope for love is bankrupt? Until you've devalued yourself so long that anyone can buy you for pennies on the dollar? Will you continuously let trauma block you from giving and getting the deep, committed love that you were designed for? How many more of your relationships have to crash before you admit a need for change? Trauma traps can only hold you hostage when you refuse to do your work to get free and you refuse to identify relationships that have earned your vulnerability. Do you want to enjoy deep emotional connections in your close relationships? If you do, then you have to tap into your power to break free. You have to choose release from chains of your past. Because when you don't work to get free, you unintentionally choose isolation instead of the real connection that you actually want. And unfortunately, despite your economic prowess, you cannot buy connection. And despite your authority, you cannot demand it. Intimacy requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and open communication. Those risky skills that calls upon the tenderness of our inner parts. So when we talk about using your power to change, we're talking about using your power to break free from harmful patterns of thinking, damaging behaviors. We're talking about a commitment to your own personal growth. We're talking about developing a lifestyle of change. Because all of us came into adulthood with issues that we had to work on. And that's hard for some people to admit. Some people want you to think, oh, they came from the perfect home, they had the perfect schooling and the perfect parents, and I'm just good. Well, that's not true. We all came into adulthood with issues that we have to work on. And so they require you choosing to change from the things that have not served you to what you feel like you deserve in life. So we want to talk about utilizing the power of God that's in you to reach your potential, regardless of the turmoil that you may have endured and regardless of the condition that you may currently be in. We want to talk about identifying the vices that grip you and laying aside the weights that slow you down. Basically breaking free from strongholds. And I can tell you from my own experience that strongholds have roots that run very deeply. That's why they're able to hold you so strongly. And breaking free requires not only your desire and your willpower, but it also requires a power that's greater than yourself. Yes, you have to have the desire to start the process, but usually your strength alone is not enough to accomplish the task. Now, I know that everybody that watches this video is not into Christianity, but that's my source. So when I speak of the power of God, you have to substitute Him for whomever you draw your strength. And just to be honest, sometimes gaining freedom requires deliverance and counseling. So if counseling is what you need, get a therapist. Ain't no shame in that. Know that there is nothing more precious to God than mankind. There is no one more precious to Him than you and I. So regardless of how things look, and regardless of how society has made you think about yourself, you have to know you are precious to God, and He wants you to have the quality of life that He has set aside just for you. After God spoke everything into existence, He took His time to create us. In other words, He put some skin in the game. He made us in His image and in His likeness. And then He breathed into Adam the breath of life. And the Bible tells us that Adam became a living soul. And y'all remember that children's movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven? Well, that ain't true. Animals don't have souls. Vegetation and fish life don't have souls. None of them can claim that they've been redeemed. Not even the angels can boast about redemption, but you and I can. So if you're going to benefit from your relationship with Christ, you must recognize and appreciate those nuances. It's like noticing the difference in treatment when your man accompanies you and a group of other women out for dinner, and he holds the door open for all of you. But then when you get inside, he lets them seat themselves, but then he pulls out your chair. That small act communicates your specialness to him. And if you miss those nuances, then you miss important relationship communications. Because we all have the breath of God in us, that drives our desire for freedom. His breath alone creates a desire in all of us to reach our potential. But you can't reach that potential if you're in bondage. And to that point, let me say this. You can only be responsible for your behavior. You cannot make another person change. Even when you think you have the power to manipulate someone into change. In order to get real change, each person has to make that their personal choice. I remember someone telling me a story one time about a child, and the parent kept insisting that the child sit down. And the child would sit down, but he would stand back up. And then the parent basically forced the child to sit down. And the child sat down and then stated, "I'm sitting down on the outside, but on the inside, I'm still standing." And what does that say? That says, you may have physically forced me to do that because you're stronger than me and you're bigger than me. But when the time comes when I can exert my own strength and my own power, I'm going to stand back up. So we've got to let people choose. Don't misunderstand me. But we're talking about adults. You have to let adults make their own choices to change. It's never productive to try to force an adult to change. When there's a behavior going on you disagree with, that needs to be discussed. And they need to understand why that behavior is a problem to you. And if they care enough, then the two of you can negotiate some sort of solution that both of you can be satisfied with. That's when you're dealing with an adult. And another point before I get into the stages of change. Change is not an on-off switch. You're not doing a bad behavior or undesirable behavior today, and then tomorrow you just decide to change it. Especially when that behavior or that pattern of thinking is deep-rooted. It just does not turn off like that. So just know change is a process, and it happens in degrees. So as we talk about these 7 stages, I want you to think about where you are in the process of change. There's the pre-contemplative stage, and this is where individuals are unaware. It could be that they are underinformed about the negative consequences of their actions, or it could just be that they are unwilling. And they just kind of, dig in when they feel like people are pressuring them to change. It could be that they just don't recognize their behavior as problematic. It could be that they are relying on denial. If you're in that pre-contemplative stage, ask yourself, why are you staying in this stage? If in these intimate connections with, they're complaining about your behaviors, ask yourself why you're choosing to stay. Could it be that you are resenting being told what to do? Are you feeling hopeless that change is impossible? Do you just find it easier to justify your behavior? Or do you feel like the cost of changing outweighs the benefits? So that's that stage. The second stage is contemplative. This is when you have an increased awareness of the problem and you're seriously thinking about changing, but you may feel unsure. So you're trying to decide if change is worth it. Then there is the preparation stage. That's the third stage. This is where you actually take action and you have a level of commitment to change. You may have even made some small steps toward the new behavior. That's in that preparation stage. Then there is the action stage. This is where you actually make the change. And not only do you actively modify your behavior, but you change things in your environment and your language change. You start talking differently about whatever the problem is. Then there is the maintenance stage. This is where you do your work to sustain your changes so that you don't go into relapse. Everything needs maintenance. All relationships need maintenance. We're not going to go there. But we can't just do a thing and think it's once and done. No, it needs to be maintained. So what is required to help you maintain that? And then there's relapse. And this is where you got to cut yourself a little slack, because we're in this new year and everybody has a determination. They've set these goals and these resolutions, and they might find themselves, a month or 2 months later, all of a sudden they've relapsed. So if they were exercising strong all of January, then February, March, I don't feel like doing it anymore. Because even after going through all the stages, if you did not prepare for all of the triggers, and it's almost impossible to know everything that would possibly trigger you, it's easy to fall back into your old behavior. But if you do, just get up and start again. Figure out what triggered you, and now you can prepare so that it don't trip you up again. The last stage is termination. This is when there's no temptation to relapse or to fall back. You've made it safely through the change. Your mindset has changed. Your environment has changed. You're there. And you can be so far from the old behavior that you kind of don't, there's just no desire. I had that experience when I came into Christ and I wanted to stop smoking. And honestly, he took the taste out of my mouth just like that. And it's been like 30 plus years since I've had a cigarette. And I know that I'm in that termination stage. Now, that's not my testimony for all of my old habits that I've tried to change. One of them I'm struggling with now, but for that one, I got the victory, all right? So that's the temptation stage. So when you consider breaking free from trauma that show up in your interactions with people, a good place to start is to recognize how you instinctively respond to trauma. And let me say this, because some people have a problem with the word trauma. They feel like, I don't have no trauma. Trauma does not have to be catastrophic. It can be a stress that you experience and you're now having to make a decision, take a certain action, and you don't have the skills or the source, or you're not able to cope with that right now. I just can't make a choice right now. I can't handle that particular thing right now. Well, that's trauma. Trauma is just an experience that overwhelms you, but we'll use the word stress. So I'm going to challenge you to understand your stress reactions as we go through these 4 trauma stress responses, okay? Fight, flight, freeze, and people please. I'm sure you've heard them a million times, but they are how we respond to those stresses that's put upon us. Fight is when a person uses aggression, and it could be physical, it could be verbal, it could just be attitudinal. I remember going out to dinner with a group of people one time, and as we were sitting at the table, one of the women that was at the table caught a severe cramp in her leg. And I was on the other end of the table, but I could see the distress. I didn't know what was going on, but I could see the distress all in her face. And she got up to go to the ladies' room, and she was kind of limping, but she was trying to be discreet. And she almost made when one of the male waiters saw her. He saw the same thing that I saw, and it was just his concern. And he said to her, "Ma'am, are you all right?" But it drew attention to her. So everybody at the table stopped what they were doing and they focused on her. And in her anger, she forcefully and very nastily said to him, "Will you leave me alone?" Because she was experiencing such pain, she could not perceive his concern. In her mind, he was just one more attack that she had to fight. So if you're on the receiving end of this type of aggression and you're wondering, wow, what have I done to cause that kind of response? Just know that it probably has very little to do with you and more to do with the person's natural response to overwhelming pressure. And it doesn't matter that you don't perceive what they're going through as traumatic or stressful. It matters that they perceive it that way, and that's their response to it. So if you're going to help them at all, you probably want to try to understand, what it is that's so stressful about the particular experience. The second one is flight. This is when a person engages in a relationship as long as it stays surface. But when it starts going deep and requires a little something of them, then they find a reason to leave. They may ghost you. You'll just start seeing a change in their pattern of interactions with you. The phone calls might be a little different. They might all of a sudden act like their attention is drawn somewhere. Sometimes they get super absorbed in their work, so that creates a legitimate distraction. Flight could be that they always have to be away. So anytime that you're dealing with something that's really pressing your heart or that's of really deep concern to you, they have a reason why they're unavailable. So that's flight. And then there's freeze. So when conflicts arise that the person can't handle alone, they say nothing and they do nothing. And they kind of hope that the problem is just going to iron its own self out, like it's going to just magically disappear. But in intimate relationships, problems don't just magically disappear. And the problem is that the person runs the risk of resentment from the partner or the people that's needing their input on resolution. And this isn't a Bible study, but we see these dynamics when King David's son raped King David's daughter. So they were brothers and sisters, but they were half brothers and sisters. But he raped Tamar. And as vile as that act was, David didn't address it. He got angry, but he said nothing and he did nothing. Emotionally, he froze. And it was his firstborn son who he got super angry, not only at his dad, not only at King David, but also at his brother. So he began to resent his father, but he positioned himself so that he could get even with both of them. Now, it was the brother that committed the act, but his resentment was toward his father for not doing anything about it, or at least not acknowledging their pain, or he just said nothing. And that's just not a reasonable position to take when you're in an intimate relationship. You can't just assume that if I say nothing, a person's emotions and all these emotions that's been stirred up, they're somehow or another, they'll just be silenced just because I'm silent. That's not reasonable. But anyway, that's freezing. Then the last one is people please. And this comes from some unmet childhood needs. This is when a person could have if they came out of a chaotic home, then you might find them always trying to create peace in a relationship. Not that peace is a bad thing, but we're talking about the dysfunctional side of it. If they came from an abusive home, then they're always trying to avoid punishment or avoid conflict, or whatever the issue is, they try to prioritize the other person's needs above their own. This is that person in a relationship that seems to never say no to anyone. They don't have clear boundaries for themselves. Now, in their defense, the upside to being a people pleaser is that people know that they can come to you and you're going to always do something to try to help them. You'll try to do your best to help them. But the downside to that is that people know that you won't say no, even sometimes to your own detriment. And because you don't respect yourself, people rarely respect a people pleaser. So those are the stress responses. These trauma responses are not by choice. They're automatic survival responses that you learned in order to keep yourself safe. And even though you're no longer in danger right now, that behavior persists because it's become ingrained in your psyche over the years. And believe it or not, you can even live in a state of trauma response so that mindset becomes your norm. You've heard that old habits die hard. Well, that's because old habits have roots. And until you address the roots, until you unearth and uproot the roots, the behavior is going to persist. It'll just keep occurring. So give yourself some grace as you're trying to change this particular behavior, whatever your stress response is. Give yourself some grace as you're trying to change it. So we talked about the 7 stages of change. And I'm going to start dealing with breaking chains that bind you. The very best place to start is looking at your trauma responses. How do you respond to stress when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're on the spot for making a decision or a choice or taking some kind of action? How do you respond to that? And if you fight, flight, freeze, or people please, then that's where you need to start with your change. So I am going to stop there and hold that thought until you're ready for more. And in the meantime, let's change on purpose.